Alright, so for our last video for this month, for this segment, where I go back and I look at old reviews and see how I completely messed up or misinterpreted movies or didn't give them a fair shot or whatever, I wanted to look at Michael Mann's Blackhat, which at the time did seem like when it came out, I felt like I remember it getting some pretty negative reviews, seemingly across the board. And then I guess I just went in with this sort of closed mind, which is weird because I'm such a massive Michael Mann fan, and I spent a lot of the movie kind of saying oh, it doesn't feel like a Michael Mann movie and stuff like that. And I don't know if the reviews just got into my head or what, but I like to think I'm not that easily influenced by early word or reviews or whatever. But looking back, it did feel like I really went into this movie knives out, but it was a long time before I even revisited it. I just kind of wrote it off as that bastard child of Michael Mann's filmography. But when I started looking at it, I guess there actually was a lot of praise for it back at the time. I knew a few assorted people that said they really liked it and thought it was this misunderstood movie. But I was just kind of writing that off as being contrarian or something like that, because that's kind of what those people that I knew, that's kind of what they did. But they probably were on to something with this, it turns out, where it did make, a number of top 10 lists from critics and stuff like that, and for some reason that didn't really seem to break into the narrative of the movie at the time. It seemed to get kind of buried by the negative word on it. Another thing that was really pushing me towards, oh, I wonder if I should look at this again, is, next month, I think, I saw that it's getting an Arrow Blu-ray release, or sometime in November, mid-November. And the thing about Arrow is, when I try to explain to people what exactly Arrow is if they don't know, basically the only way I can think of to sum it up is it's essentially Criterion for cult movies, or of that sort. So when I saw that, it's there's always some sort of prestige factor that comes with that, which was kind of giving me the vibe when I saw that is, Criterion and Arrow releases maybe a placebo effect for movies that I just don't like. Is there something about them getting that sort of prestige factor with getting that kind of release that kind of makes you turn your mind around on it a little bit? But there was a lot of things that made me want to go back and look at this, and it was hanging out on Netflix. So let's go into the first thing we can address. I don't know what happened here. This feels a lot like one of those things, like I was talking about with Dying of the Light and Paul Schrader. It feels like this movie was taken away from Mann, and something was done to it by the production company and, producers and stuff like that. So I don't know about all of that, but from the sounds of it, it sounds like it's pretty much the movie that Mann wanted it to be. There is a quote here where he was talking about the negative reception, and he said, "It's my responsibility, the script was not ready to shoot, the subject may have been ahead of the curve because there was a number of people who thought that was all fantasy, wrong, everything is stone cold accurate." So that sounds like he does really stand by it, but the other thing on this is that there was a re-edit that's 3 minutes longer, that's kind of the director's cut of it, which I feel like a lot of people were kind of expecting would eventually come out. And we've talked about this stuff before, where 3 minutes doesn't seem like that big of a difference, but when you do a re-edit, there are a lot of different things you can change around, and you'd be really surprised how much can change with just a re-edit, even if it's something that you barely notice. And whether it works on the pacing, or whether it's... because I think they also kind of shifted scenes also, which is something else that could play a really big part in just the movie's overall flow. And I guess that director's cut is going to be on the Arrow Blu-ray, so I will be interested in checking that out. Like I said, I just watched the one that was on Netflix, which I'm assuming is just the theatrical cut. So that's what we're talking about here, but even without the re-edit, I'm still finding more merits in it as I've gone back to it, even if it's just the theatrical version. Yeah, I did. You saw me doing this. I was watching the whole movie, looking for any sign of Michael Mann.
Oh, yeah. And you were quite happy when it happened.
Yeah, you could do, it was like playing Where's Fucking Waldo. Because here's the thing. There are many signs of a Michael Mann movie, if you're familiar with his filmography. And I counted 3. Other than that,
generic spy thriller. This movie could have been fucking anybody.
Yeah, so when we did this video, it was pretty much like right out of the theater, whereas when I've watched it since on Netflix, and I've watched it a couple of times since we saw it in the theater, and I'm kind of surprised that I said this because it does have a lot of vein in it, and you would think in like, you know, a big screen with theater sound that would really stick out, but for some reason home viewings made it a lot more clear to me that this is absolutely a Michael Mann movie. Like I mentioned in the video, like there's like a helicopter shot and like a boat shot and stuff like that clearly look like him, like his, you know, aesthetic. But I mean, everything from like the score and the dialogue, and I actually complain later about there being really loud gunshots, and I think my complaint is that there's like a sound fluctuation, but we'll get to that point. But it's interesting that I bring up the loud gunshots, but I didn't mention that here as far as I remember. And that's like one of the reasons you go to a Michael Mann movie is like the really loud and realistic gunshots. So there's one here. I mentioned the dialogue a second ago. The restaurant scene, which for some reason I was also really critical of in the video. There's the dialogue that he has with her there. Actually, looking back on it, reminds me a lot of like the scenes between James Caan and Tuesday Weld in Thief. And it's like when he's giving her that dialogue about, you know, like the inside and all that, that sounds like dialogue that would directly be in one of those scenes, like one of those diner scenes in Thief or something. And just in general, like I said, the general feel and aesthetic, it really does feel like Mann, and I don't know. It's a mystery to me why I didn't see that, especially in the theater. So now about the portrayal of hacking.
It's just those shots of people typing and, you know, looking at computer screens.
Yeah.
This is one of those movies where the actors were basically told to go up to computers and just start hitting buttons, and then the screen would make it look like they did some, like, hacking shit.
I have to say, I don't really have much of worth to add on to this, but I just wanted to point out that I said this, and it's actually, to my understanding, that this movie has often been highlighted for being a super accurate portrayal of hacking, and pretty much everything they do in this movie has been praised, especially by people that work in this field, apparently, that this movie is super accurate, and that's one of the big things that's kind of the appeal as you look more into it and learn more about it, and as it's gotten more love over time, is just in general how real it is. So that's... Yeah, like I said, I don't have experience in hacking or anything like that, so I can't really speak on that, but I'll take everybody's word for it, I guess. So that was just kind of a misled criticism.
And then there are a whole bunch of scenes of people staring at computer screens. Yes, it was kind of like watching The Fifth Estate again a little bit.
It's, well, it came to my mind too.
With a little bit of thriller thrown into it.
Alright, so I feel like this is the real meat of what we can talk about here, and just kind of the general... Not only just a misunderstanding of the movie, but kind of going into a movie where you make up your mind really early on is something that can happen a lot. Where if a movie doesn't grab you in like the first 5 or 10 minutes, or looks like it's going to be one particular thing that maybe you're not into in like the opening scenes, you're pretty much not going to give the rest of the movie a chance, and you're basically going to pick apart, especially if you do like videos like this, you're going to find just reasons to pick it apart as you go along without even really giving the movie any leeway to win you over. And I feel like that, at least for me, that's pretty much probably what happened with this movie, because this does feel like a different movie to me than whatever I was talking about when I made this video back then. And it can be really easy to sort of pick an emotion and stick with it as you watch a movie. So once you can get past that, I do understand the feeling of like how the movie starts and they're talking about like soy futures, and like that's the whole sort of catalyst for what starts here. And I can see people feeling bored really fast, which is probably what happened to me. But this movie is once you get past what that is, as far as understanding what's going on, I feel like a lot of people will have to admit to themselves throughout this movie that, yeah, maybe they just won't understand completely what's going on. But I feel like the beauty of the way everything is done here is I don't feel like you need to know exactly all the technical stuff, and I imagine pretty much any average viewer of the movie is not going to completely understand what's going on or the terminology or why certain things are a really big deal. But the way Mann portrays everything, you get enough of an idea of what the general objective is from scene to scene that you can still have a reaction to it, whether it be excitement or emotional or whatever it is. And it's very exciting, and there's a lot of scenes that are exciting in like low-key ways, where it's like when we're watching him do his thing, and it's like when we see that, you know, he's talking to the Blackhat himself and stuff like that, like in the restaurant, the movie gives you the feel that you're like right over his shoulder watching him do these things. And like I said, even if you don't understand exactly what's going on and like how they communicate and what they're communicating about, you still know that what his job is and who the Blackhat is and what's going on here as far as the stakes in general. And so in that alone, I think you can find a lot of excitement, especially when it's a Michael Mann movie, and how he's able to find that kind of tension and that way to grab an audience and pull them in with suspense and all those, like, and stuff like, even stuff that doesn't seem suspenseful on the surface but can give you like a good rush or a good feel, which is when they're doing like surveillance stuff or stakeouts and stuff like that. And it's like, even though those are like low-key activities, there's a real suspense in there, and it's where you can really feel like you're sitting in with the characters in these moments. And that stuff can be really exciting without any particular action going on. Because that was, the whole people staring at computer screens thing was, I remember being a very consistent criticism in a lot of the negative reviews that it got. So my review was essentially extremely unoriginal. But yeah, with all that stuff thrown in, the other characters thrown in, like Holt McCallany and Viola Davis and the brother, there's plenty of characters here that we kind of get enough of a vibe of, and we get just enough there, like especially Viola Davis, where her character has a bit of mystery and intrigue to her, but there's enough of an emotional factor, especially when they bring in the bit about her husband. Like there's enough in here to grab you, even if you're not completely aware of the inner workings of what's going on. But like I said, as long as you just get the gist of it, you should be. I can imagine this movie having pretty kind of wide appeal as long as people are willing to give into the fact that they may not know everything that's going on. I feel like it handles that pretty well. The first, like, real action scene is, like, an hour in, which is, like, halfway through the movie. But they still find ways to really pull you in with what's going on. Like I said, as long as you're willing to just sort of give yourself away to it, which is really what any movie asks for. And talking about the emotional factor also, where her brother dies in the explosion, and like, there's this whole portion here where the brother gets killed, Viola Davis and Holt McCallany all get killed like all at once, and you would think that that's like this sort of, oh, we're kind of rushing to get to a certain point, but no, that's setting up the stakes for the third act, but it's also setting it up from an emotional standpoint where it makes Hemsworth's character more sort of motivated, but in this really dark way. Like, we really get to see a dark side come out of him as he goes into this, and he gets almost bloodthirsty, you might say, but in a way that's very, he's still perfectly in control of the situation. But the way the movie is able to acknowledge, we have to grieve later, is what he says to her. So not only do they acknowledge that, and she reacts right away, which is something you don't typically see when, like, you know, of like a family member or something is killed in the midst of an action scene or a plot that's, you know, this moving forward all the time. And so when we get that moment where he acknowledges, we will grieve, but it has to be later, and then they pay that off with the scene on the plane, where while they're on the plane, the plot is able to still move forward, and it gives them this time to actually have this moment. And I like the fact that it's not like a super big dramatic moment. We can see all the emotion in both their faces. Not only did she lose her brother, but he lost like a long-time friend. And you can see them both emoting differently, but the strength in those emotions and performances are still there for both of them. And it's just the music playing over it, with nothing like big and dramatic about it, no dialogue about it. It's just pure emotion. But like I said, because they're on the plane, the movie is still moving while they can grieve, and that's just a That's a pretty brilliant way to pull that off. And then there's Hemsworth's like confrontations with the villains, with Richard Coster, and then ultimately the Blackhat himself. And I love the way they build this up, where with Richard Coster, we essentially have a villain that's present through the whole movie, but the Blackhat is somebody that's built up to the whole time. And I love the way we gradually get to the point of he and Hemsworth having a face-to-face confrontation, because first they're just talking anonymously through the computer, and then we get to this point where they're talking on the phone. Just them talking on the phone feels like this big climatic moment we've been building to the whole time. And then when they kind of tease face-to-face confrontation that first time, when he figures out he's brought a lot of guys, and then we finally have the final big confrontation. And like I said, Hemsworth's ready to kill at this point. And the way they build that up in his relationship with the villains is so well done and so sort of exhilarating as it gets closer and closer.
Sometimes the sound was quite off. I don't know if that was our theater or the movie or what, but the sound would kind of be sometimes quiet and sometimes not. And then in the same... This is what makes me think it was the movie and not our sound. In the same scene, there is this big... like one of the only action scenes in the movie. There is a gunfight, and the guns are fucking loud. And then, like, a minute and a half later, a dude sets an explosive off, and something explodes. That explosion was significantly quieter than the guns. Did you find that weird?
Alright, having seen the movie a couple more times now, and having the luxury of seeing the movie with headphones, I can say that this is kind of, the sound is a mixed bag of either kind of shoddily put together, but also amazing, because like I said, we're still dealing with a Michael Mann movie. As far as shoddy goes, most of it is in dialogue that seems sort of ADR, and it's very, very obvious. And somebody will either be on screen or somebody will even be off screen. Either way, you can see where sometimes it feels like things don't match up, but like when a character speaks off screen, there's one particular moment. There's a line towards the beginning where the guy says, how we figured that out was through the coding in the rat. And when he says through the coding, it's very clearly a different piece of audio. And you can kind of catch that throughout. I think there's a point in time where Viola Davis says something and we're looking directly at her. And you can hear, like, the volume fluctuate in her voice. And it is really weird that stuff like that did make it into the final cut. But on the other side of that, yes, it's still a Michael Mann movie, and there's still plenty of amazing moments of sound that, for some reason, I mean, I mentioned that maybe our sound still was bad in the theater, just kind of coincidentally, but I didn't notice until I was, like, really watching with, like, headphones, and it was, like, right here, that some stuff really stood out. Like, the opening scene. I used to think the opening scenes were kind of silly, where it's like we kind of go inside the computers and do that whole thing. But it's not only is that fine to me now, like it looks better than I initially. I remembered it looking kind of cartoony and really CGI before, but it looks better than I remember. But it's the sound in those moments that really sort of brings you in and kind of takes you on this ride through the inner workings of what's going on here. The stuff we don't see typically in, like, you know, hacking movies or movies that are computer-based and stuff like that. And it feels like it's giving us the inside and the outside of all that. And the sound is what really makes that work. And, yeah, I talk about the really loud guns, which, you know, like I said, we're here for that because it's a Michael Mann movie. But talking about the difference between the guns and the explosion, where it's the explosion that Richard Gosser sets off in that same scene. But it's clear that the difference is when the guns are going off, everybody's in, like, kind of this enclosed space. Like, it's kind of like a hallway or something. And then when that explosion goes off, the explosion goes off in that place, but we're outside, and we're kind of seeing it from the outside perspective. So I think that's why the gunshots seemed louder. There's even just moments where it seems like they're kind of being playful with the sound. Like when we first meet Hemsworth in prison, and he's got the headphones on, and the sound changes from when he has them on to when he takes them off. Stuff like that. So there's plenty to appreciate in the sound, especially if it's like right in your ears. But yeah, those dialogue moments are pretty rough still. Hopefully the director's cut sorts those out. And now let's talk about Hemsworth for a second.
Let's start with Chris Hemsworth. Because generally he's an actor that a lot of people can look at and say, oh, he's in movies because, he looks like Thor. Women, like to look at him. But no, Chris Hemsworth is a good actor.
Yeah.
Farther than just Avengers movies, Here, I'm not sure what happened. For starters, I could only understand about half of what he said, if that. I'm not sure what kind of accent he was going for.
Yeah, I know people have said that Hemsworth doing an American accent is something that kind of really sticks out, and you can tell that it's not his forte. But and maybe there is a little mumbling here and there, but maybe it's the benefit of headphones, but it's also the benefit of subtitles, perhaps. But I didn't really see much of a problem with that the other times I've watched it. And he's been critical of himself. There was a quote here where he's talking about Blackhat, and he said, "I didn't enjoy what I did in the film. It just felt flat, and it was also an attempt to do what I thought people might have wanted to see, but I don't think I'm good in that space." I don't know. I think he's perfectly fine in this. We already talked about those scenes, the emotion-based scenes, where after his friend and her brother has blown up and they're grieving on the plane. I said there's a lot of stuff that he can emote without having to say. And that's what I've always said was one of his strengths, was just his presence in general. And his ability to not need dialogue to do the... And that might sound like a backhanded compliment, but I actually... Sometimes it can be a lot harder. And I was talking about the restaurant scene where he's kind of giving his prison backstory. And it's like, stuff like that, it feels true to me and feels true to the character. So I think he's fine in this.
So he's working with this girl, the girl from Lust Caution. This is one of those movies where a love story happens for no goddamn reason. Like, there's one scene where they get chased after this really prolonged scene in a restaurant, and then an action scene breaks out really briefly, and by the way, the camera just suddenly goes into distracting handheld when this action scene happens. So, that was weird. And then, after this scene happens, they just fucking fall in love.
Yeah.
And the rest of the movie stays with that.
I guess I do still agree with this to an extent. But overall, especially when we get into that third act, like I was talking about, where the emotions have to be really high, I do feel like it does add another layer to it, that these are two characters that have fallen in love. Even if it does feel like they sort of abruptly fall in love in that the script is just asking them to way. But I don't think it's helped by the fact that they do kind of lack chemistry. Like, I do praise Hemsworth in this, and I love her big emotional scenes. But yeah, together for these scenes, it does feel a little too abrupt, and I don't think it helps that she's another victim of the audio problems. There's a few times in this where she looks like she's almost dubbed, like she's dubbed herself or something, and that's going to be something that kind of throws it off a little bit. In the way that her brother says, like, I've never seen her happier, and that's just something that doesn't really ring true in the moment. It's like, really, after these couple of scenes, I don't really get that vibe, but you're her brother, so I guess you would know. I guess one appealing thing about this is, if you want to take the man approach again, is that I guess it does kind of give vibes, as far as it seeming like it's for no reason at all that they fall in love. I guess it does bring back vibes of Neil McCauley in Heat, where it's like kind of watching a criminal have his own love story that's otherwise pretty... Well, I was going to say traditionally done. In Heat, it's a pretty traditional love story, and like how they meet and stuff like that at a bar, and then have the typical romance that escalates. Here, it's a bit more of a not-so-traditional escalation given the situation that they're in. But, like I said, it kind of the similar purpose of storytelling as far as having a criminal be one of your main characters, and see that they also have these emotions. Like I said, it's the part that those emotions play as we're leading into the third act that does feel like it probably works, that these are two characters that are in love, so we'll give it the benefit of the doubt on that. So I think that about sums up how much better I feel about Blackhat now, and I am really interested to see this director's cut and see how much the flow changes and how it could probably be an even better movie now, and really sort of finally find this turnaround that it kind of... It feels like it was starting to get when it first came out, but to kind of see it get a full sort of treatment and a full sort of re-look from everybody... I'll be really interested to see where this movie's reputation lands in like maybe another few years or so, if it's in a completely different place than it is now, and it's like right up there with, the rest of Mann's filmography, and doesn't stick out the way it seemed like it did back when it first came out. So I look forward to seeing how that goes. So the next two things, we only have two more videos now in September. It's one more versus, one more review video, and then it's all the October stuff, which I'm super psyched about. So until all that stuff, I think that's it.